Welcome to Ferment Radio, a podcast series on bacterial and social fermentation. Fermentation can incite social actions, spark creativity, and bring surprising new tastes to our lives. My name is Aga Pokrywka, and I invite you to join us in a conversation on living interconnectivities, from macro to micro, from societal to cellular, and from global to personal. In 2015, while in grad school, Cecilia Westbrook made yogurt out of her vaginal flora as an experimental side project. A journalist friend of hers wrote about it, and the article got published on Vice. It immediately went viral, spawning a number of copycat publications that re-edited the original text, but never added more content, let alone created space for dialogue or reflection. This situation caused problems with her academic institution since at the moment she was undergoing PhD studies, and triggered a landslide of misogynistic remarks towards her, many of which can still be found online. For these reasons, she had to refuse commenting on the harmless yet for some people controversial yogurt. How is it so that making yogurt out of our own secretions can bring such hostile reactions? How is this related to our disconnection from the human body and the food system? How is this related to the general taboo, misconception, and contempt towards vaginas? Now, 7 years after, Ferment Radio has the great pleasure to learn more about that particular yogurt and the avalanche it caused, directly from Cecilia Westbrook. Why did you decide to say yes to this conversation? Because it's so many years, vaginal yogurt. It was 2015, 6 years ago.
That's a good question. The main reason, as I'll get into a little bit more, is I was really not in a position where I could do any interviews at all for a few years until I left the institution that I was at. So I've always thought I wanted to come back and have an opportunity to tell more of this story. And you gave me a really great opportunity to do it. And I enjoyed, I went back, I haven't listened to your whole back catalog yet, but I have been listening to old episodes, and I like the approach that you have on this podcast too. I think it's a really neat project. So it's my pleasure. I don't really get a lot of opportunities to talk about this project anymore.
Yeah, it was this weird kind of a burst in 2015. Basically, each of the articles, I kind of browsed it now before our conversation now, because I was like, what they were writing about it. And it's really strange that they are just kind of copying each other. I don't know about copyrights, but really, like, nobody really, I don't know. I mean, Vice wrote or published the first article, but I didn't learn anything new after. So just to recap, like in 2015, or maybe the other way around. Maybe you tell us this story. What happened in 2015?
Sure. I'll tell you the whole story, and it will be a little bit long-winded. So this all started, and my background, I'm not a microbiologist. I am not an artist. I'm a psychiatrist. And this started when I was in graduate school. I also have a PhD in psychology. And for people who have done a PhD, it's a very long process, and it can be quite boring and dull, and sometimes you look for things to entertain yourself. But what had happened was when I was in graduate school, I was on the internet one night with some friends, and we were just joking around. It was late, and the topic had come up about how men should perform oral sex on women because it's probiotic. This was a joke. And then I just had this insight of, wow, I bet you could make yogurt from vaginal flora. And we all thought it was funny. And I, for no particular reason, just thought it would be interesting to try it. And I'm somebody who, I enjoy projects. I I was into sourdough baking at that time and other types of fermentation and things. And I just thought this would be sort of a fun thing to do. So I set it up, and then when it worked, I was delighted. I thought it was a fun project, and I shared it with my friends. But it just so happens that one of my friends in that community is a freelance journalist. So that's Janet, who wrote the original article. So she thought it'd be worthwhile to pitch it to Vice. And so it got published, and then it immediately went viral. And so that ended up turning my life upside down. And as we can get into a little bit more, I ended up more or less getting in trouble with my institution and causing what they perceived, I think, as political problems for them, which had to do in part with the political climate in Wisconsin at the time, which is where I was. So I ended up being put under a lot of pressure and was strongly advised to not do any more interviews or any more media about it and let it die. So the original article was written by Janet, and she consulted with me. We're good friends to this day. And there basically was no more coverage after that. And, it went viral. It bounced around to all of these copycat websites. So like you said, they re-edited the text and then they photoshopped my face next to pictures of yogurt or other ridiculous things. But there wasn't really any other content there. I did like an AMA on the Jezebel website. And then I did one other interview with an Irish public radio program that I don't even think I could dig up anymore if I looked for it. But after that, I was told in pretty much, no uncertain terms by my institution that they didn't want me to do any more interviews or any more media. And so that was pretty much the end of it. The other thing that I experienced was just all of the reactions that people had. Many people reached out to me. I got a million friend requests on Facebook, a lot of terrible things that people said to me or about me. I had a few offers for like startup companies, just very strange things. And as you mentioned, a lot of just sort of misogynistic, weird, things that people said on Twitter and that kind of thing. And so I lived through that for a while, and then eventually it kind of faded away. But to this day, if you search me on Google, you'll find some of my professional things, and then the rest of it is all pretty much vagina yogurt. So this is the legacy that I live with.
Yeah, how you appear in my Google. I put your name, and then Google usually points you out like what to write farther, and it's your name and surname and yogurt.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow, but I have to say that like when I was thinking about our conversation, I thought that, or maybe I have to say very honestly, I am surprised that by the amount of like very mean feedback or reactions you got. I kind of knew, or I saw like how the articles were written, but I think I am like right now even like surprised or overwhelmed that I feel from you that it was even more than that. So first of all, I'm kind of sorry to hear, and like even more worried like on what kind of world we live in. And without going to the details yet, what do you think that making a yogurt from vaginal secretion brings up this kind of behaviors in people? What kind of area in them it touches that they are becoming suddenly misogynist or suddenly kind of? I think many of those texts were also ironic.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet if there would be a recipe how to, I don't know, make a yogurt from a semen, it would be like, oh, ha ha ha, funny, but nobody would be like aggressive about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a semen cookbook that came out, I don't know, a decade or more ago, that was sent to me many, many times. And I saw many sort of side-by-side comparisons, which bear out exactly your impulse there. I don't know what it was. I was really surprised by it when this happened. Of course, I didn't expect this to go viral. I thought it would be something fun that would get published and sort of go away. But it really seems to have hooked something in people. And I would say the number one thing that I notice is disgust. Is people just are grossed out by it. And I don't know why. And it is interesting. I think there's something about yogurt that already people seem to have a love-hate relationship with it. There are many people who really find yogurt to be unpleasant. And the idea of this somehow being combined with vaginal flora, which is also an area I think that a lot of particularly cis men, but sort of I think overall in our heteronormative culture, it's regarded as gross. And so this idea of bringing these two together seems to have really triggered something that people find, somehow unpalatable. And I didn't think that way at all. I thought, this is flora. This is microbiology. And this is our bodies. And this is turning something, something that's part of us. It's part of that travels with us into a food form that we already, eat and enjoy. And I didn't make that connection at all. If anything, I thought it was a little bit funny. But no, so I was completely surprised by that. And there was also an undercurrent of people, some people who sent me some of these messages were saying things like as though I was forcing people to eat it, as though I was trying to make people do it, or that I was trying to turn this into some kind of marketable project or product rather, and sell it to people. And I was like forcing this. It was very strange. This wasn't a food that I fed to anybody. It was just a sort of a proof of concept. I was just curious if, really at the heart of it, I was curious if the lactobacillus that was in my vagina was sort of the same that are in yogurt, and if it would work the same way. It was really sort of the start and end to it.
I have a feeling that there's also, there was this general surprise that, oh, you can make yogurt by yourself, and oh, yogurt is made with a bacterial starter or some bacterial culture. I think there was also a little bit of this a always explanatory part, oh, in case you do not know how to make a yogurt, and probably you don't know how to do it, this is how you do it. And then you probably didn't know that there is bacteria living in vagina, and that you can start, one of them is lactobacillus, and you can put it to that milk and make that yogurt. I think it was a combo of many information, which I think maybe, and this is also, I wanted to talk about it. Are we also in this 6 years after having a little bit more knowledge about those things as large as a society? But I think that this disconnection from the food system, so I don't know how my food is being made, but also disconnection from own body and in general human body. I don't know as a person with a vagina how my vagina actually works, but also other people who could be interested in that vagina. They also don't want to know those details. So I think there were many kind of taboos coming together, and another thing, oh, and it's a woman experimenting and hacking that. This is not good. So I think that's my kind of personal opinion why something which was totally like a homemade experiment became this explosion, let's say.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That disconnection from, you're right, the disconnections with our own bodies and disconnection with the food system are so profound. And there's I think is a piece of it, the misogynistic piece is really about, I like your point about women experimenters. I hadn't thought about that, but there's this perception of the female body that's very much packaged for male perception. And needs to be sterilized somehow to be palatable for men. And so the idea of vaginal flora is it seems to be so frightening or so taboo. We need to, you can even look at the history of things like douches and all of that, and the idea we need to clean our vaginas to make them accessible to men. They need to be, sterilized in this way. And so this project, turned that completely on its head.
Did you feel somehow, or how did it impact the friendship with your friend who wrote that text? Like, what kind of conversations, or did you have conversations about it with her? Because you kind of collaborated on it in a way that you made the experiment, but she kind of brought it to the world.
Yeah, we had many. And as I said, she's still a good friend to this day. And this article was actually really big for her career, which was a delight to me. And one of the things that transpired after this all became so viral is she sort of stepped in and took almost a protective role of me, because she was monitoring Twitter and, articles and things that were published. And at some point she said to me, why don't you not look at it and just let me filter it, and I'll send you anything that's interesting, but why don't you just, protect yourself from all the things people are saying. And that was fine with me. There were a few things interesting. There was a group I had meant to find this article and I forgot to do it, but there was a scientist in a Scandinavian country that I'm forgetting, but she actually tried to replicate it. I don't know if you found that article. She was unsuccessful.
Yeah, I saw it. I think she's Danish. She's from Denmark, I think. She kind of wanted to repeat this experiment in more like a scientific setting, let's say.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. She didn't succeed, and she concluded that I had possibly contaminated my culture.
But on the other hand, if you do any yogurt at home, when you are sure that you made actually a yogurt and it's not a sour milk, right? I think there's always this this wonder there. But coming to like a step-by-step instruction, like after you got the idea, right? Like you just like told us like how it came into being, and how did you come up with like the experiment, and how actually did you do it exactly? Was it more spontaneous, or you were like, oh, this milliliters of that,
no.
This many milliliters of this, and this temperature? No. Okay, so it's
like not super precise. No, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not that kind of scientist. But I did think I wanted to have a positive and a negative control to see if it really worked. I don't remember my logic at the time, but I either had some yogurt or I bought some yogurt, just commercially available live cultured yogurt. And so I had 3 mason jars, I remember, and I think I bought a gallon of milk for this or something. But I filled them all up with milk. One of them I added nothing to. One of them I added yogurt to, like commercial yogurt, as a positive control. And then the last one, I collected a little bit of vaginal secretion using a spoon. It wasn't very sophisticated. And I put it in the third one. And when I did, I remember I left it. I read instructions for yogurt making. I never made yogurt before that, but I put it in my oven. It was a gas oven and the pilot light was on, and I left it. And I remember I did it in the morning and I checked it in the evening. And I think the commercial yogurt had turned into yogurt and the vaginal one had not. And I thought, oh, this is a failure. But I just left it in the oven overnight. And then when I checked in the morning, about 24 hours later, they were both yogurts. So there's a possibility that the positive culture had somehow cross-contaminated the vaginal one. But I tried to be sterile as best as I could. But you never know. So, but it took about twice as long for that one. So it was whatever it was inoculated with, there was a much lower amount of it. But that was the whole thing.
I have to confess that I tried to do this experiment on my own also, like a few years ago, but I was inspired by you, I have to say. And I did it in the art setting because I'm not sure if you were aware of that, but the action you did is kind of, I think if you would do it in art gallery setting, it wouldn't get this attention. Because people are like, oh, art is weird, and it has no it is kind of detached from reality very often. But I did this series. I was looking for the way like people try to reuse themselves, like their body, making a yarn from hair, making a yogurt from vaginal secretions, or I don't know, even doing salt from your sweat. Like all of those things are on internet, and I try to do like this, YouTube like tutorials, step by step, informing how to do those things. It was kind of a joke or provocation on those things, like, oh, we should recycle everything and so on. Of course, I'm totally I'm not denying these things, but for me, it's the questions like how far we can go with that. I did my yogurt too, and I used this like I don't know how this brush is called, but it looks a little bit like this brush for eyelashes. It's like a long and like with like a many little whiskers, let's say. So I used this one because I thought it can catch like a more content between the whiskers. Yeah, it did something, but for me it was also a question mark. Like, yeah, I'm not sure what it did it exactly. It did ferment, but who knows from what. So that's about the process. But you also mentioned about that in the institution where you were working at that time, this was a big problem. Would you like to tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah. So to my understanding, really the biggest problem, well, at the heart of it, I would say if I had to go back and do anything again, is I would, ask Janet not to publish the name of my institution, because there was no reason to publish that. It didn't really add any. I think it was supposed to add maybe a little bit of sort of color, but it ended up essentially pulling them into it. And then they were very concerned about their image. The other thing that was happening is in Wisconsin at the time, we had a governor who was very hostile to higher education. And it just so happens that the same week that this article came out, a few days prior, he had announced a budget proposal which was going to cut like $300 million from the university system or something like that. And so my institution was on high alert at that time. And they didn't want any negative press at all. And they didn't want any perception that somehow that any public money might be being used for anything that could be remotely controversial, because they didn't want that to become a political football that could, be used as an argument for a hostile government. And I'm sympathetic to that. It was really just an unfortunate timing. So if you stop and think about it at all, it's also like, this was upsetting because there might have been public money used to study vaginas, which is like, like the fact that that's political. I mean, it's unbelievable. The way this transpired was that nobody approached me directly, but suddenly all of the people who were supervising me, like my advisor and stuff, all suddenly started to email me and set up meetings with me. And so it was very clear that somebody was talking to them. And the first question was, did you use any grant money for this? And I said, of course not. Like, I don't have a grant for, I study psychology. This was a personal project. It was made very clear to me through a few people that spoke to me, basically, that I had freedom of speech, but that things could be made very difficult for me. As a graduate student, you don't have a lot of leverage and you don't have a lot of power. And so there are ways that they can make your life difficult. And people who cared about me genuinely and were some of my mentors kind of said, this is not something that's contributing to your academic life, and it's probably best just to leave it alone. But what did happen was but at that time, I basically said, okay, I just won't do any more interviews. I'm just going to leave it be. But I had already done this interview with this like Irish radio program, and I'd more or less forgotten about it, and it didn't get published. I think it was like, 2 or 3 weeks later that it was actually published. And the reason I found out that it had been published is actually I woke up to a chain of emails that had started at 6 a.m, like from our chancellor's office to all of the people, and then had filtered down to somebody emailing me and saying, I thought you said you weren't going to do any more interviews. And I was like, how on earth are you aware of this Irish public radio broadcast the second that it downloads? Obviously there was a Google alert for my name that was set up to monitor me. I mean, I was like, I don't think this is going to have a lot of impact in America. It's probably going to be okay. But yeah, it was very clear that they were keeping an eye on me. And so I decided at that point it was probably best just to try to stay out of the limelight. And the thing about it is, it didn't, as far as I know, it didn't end up really being used in that way. I don't think it ended up being necessarily a problem for the university. But I think, unfortunately, in our country, the institutions of higher learning are always, particularly the public ones, are always in the crosshairs, and they, I think, need to be on high alert all the time because they're always under threat. And it's just really, it's really unfortunate. And it's really unfortunate that, if I had said, if I had built a robot in my spare time out of cutlery or something, I'm sure the message would have been, look at this stem. Oh, it's so great, but because God forbid it was something to do with vaginas, it was just, it had to be squashed, and that just, so it was really, in addition to all the other things we've covered, I mean, it really also brings in, there's this political piece as well of what is and isn't allowable and what women can say and what women can't say.
Is there something which you would be able to clearly see as the learning from this whole situation? It's not just, I learned that it is possible to ferment milk this way, but what would be like a reflection or learning after this all?
That's a good question.
Or I don't know even if learning, but something, maybe some reflection which would come to your mind which you didn't have before. Because to me, I think the learning is that from what I hear from you and from what I read on the internet, I think I kind of maybe live in a bubble, and I would never think that something like this can receive this kind of feedback and reactions. And then suddenly you see that, but there is this kind of reaction. And I think it makes me surprised. I'm like, okay, where are all those people who are saying all those things? That would be, I think that's my kind of like, it amazes me somehow.
I think I had the same reaction, I think. Of course, I was surprised when it was viral, but then I was surprised by how negative the reaction was to it. Although, and I should be fair, there were people like yourself, and, I had a few people reach out to me, and still to this day, and say that this was sort of inspiring, or that they found it interesting and thought-provoking. So, yes, I also think I live probably in a similar bubble. I think on a day-to-day level, what I learn and what I take with me is basically to be thoughtful about what you write and, when you name your institutions. I'm an academic person. I'm a physician, and so you have to be thoughtful always about, what you say that could be perceived as medical advice and that kind of stuff too, which none of this should be taken. And those, that there's just a real media awareness and awareness of the interconnectivity of media and the world that we live in. And those are not really, I don't think, really interesting, probably in the way that you're looking for. I think a lot of the things that we talked about, really about just the way that vaginas are perceived, the way that just human body flora is such a taboo, the disconnection that we have from our bodies. I think those are the things that I really became more aware of. And just, I think, how subversive it is to do something with your body that is not acceptable or understood, and how much it upsets people.
Interesting that you were a physician, because I think there is something about like that sometimes doctors on a societal level, they have kind of a more of a right to look into the bodies of other people than those bodies themselves, like those people in those bodies themselves. or definitely, I think this is super majorly, people would more trust the opinions of doctors about, oh, this looks this and that, and we cannot feel or see it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you see it like in your practice? Like, actually, what's your specialty? Like, with what kind of patients do you work, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah, I'm a psychiatrist. I'm still finishing my residency training.
Okay. So this is not so much body based, but still you went through the medical studies when the body is very present, let's say.
Yeah. And the body is definitely present in psychiatry, and that's a whole other conversation, but far away from microbiology, definitely, if nothing else. Yeah, there are some interesting thoughts nowadays about microbiota and human body flora and how they affect mental health, which is, like I said, it's a whole other topic. I think what's more salient in what you're saying is the idea that I think about how when I have done hospital work, we get cultures from people and we take biopsies and things like that, and we put them in the laboratory and we look at them and we understand them as pathogens. But the idea then of doing that and taking it, but then turning it into food and something that you eat and enjoy is like just crosses so many boundaries for people.
Do you think that if this whole experiment coverage would happen today, like right now, do you think it would have a different reception? Do you think that as a society, like a global society, it's such a terrible generalization because we are so different societies, but do you think it would get different reception? Like, what's your feeling about it? Can people take vaginal yogurts these days or not?
I don't think so. Honestly, I don't. I don't think we've advanced that much just in the past 5 or 6 years. Perhaps I did my part to make us just a little bit more comfortable with that conversation. And if that's my legacy, that's okay. That's okay.
I had this friend who had this story that we are born to do that one thing, which really matters. And I was thinking, wow, maybe this vaginal yogurt will be yours, but maybe it's not seen yet. It's kind of a joke, but
I've had a similar thought. When this happened, I thought, I was internationally famous for 1 month, and so not everybody gets to do that. So
I think you are the first person in my entire life I'm talking to who was viral. I never talked to a viral person before. And I'm thinking it's interesting word viral, actually, no, because like from virus, so also a little bit, micro scale here. We can say it fermented out,
Yeah, I like that. But no, it's an interesting thought though, because I'm thinking as you're talking about, there's little changes, like the menstrual cups are more common and more accepted now, and now you have commercials where the liquid that pours onto a pad is red instead of being blue. And these little micro steps. And I think, if there is one thing I hope was impactful about this project, it's just making people think about vaginas a little more and having to have some of that conversation. I don't think we've moved the needle very far, but maybe we've moved it a little bit in the past 5 years. And that would be positive. That would make me feel good.
I want to believe so too, but also I kind of I'm still thinking about the sentence you said that people felt somehow that you are trying to push on them that yogurt that was like not acceptable. But there is also another thing among those many we mentioned, like which were ingredients to this whole kind of viral eruption. Is this that okay? So why this person did it? Like, did she want to do it for money? Probably yes, right? So maybe there will be some idea of turning into the business. And you mentioned you had some startup offers, and then we will have to all eat it or something. I don't know. I think that people, for people, it's very, or for many people, it's very hard to kind of grasp it that, yeah, people are doing things for fun or curiosity.
Yeah.
And that's it. There is nothing behind it.
Yeah, that's our capitalist world, isn't it?
There's also another thing which made me think in case of the vaginal yogurt is that, you know, we talk these days a lot about feminism and I don't know, position of women in the society, and I feel like it sometimes come up in this actions like, oh, I will stop to shave my armpits, or I will stop to shave my legs, or I will make the yogurt from my vagina because I own it. And I think that for people who are kind of not accepting the idea of women being equal with all other people, they stick somehow their attention to these elements. Like, oh, so this is the liberation about, right? About making yogurt, or I don't know, not putting makeup on or something. And maybe this is another element why it got this attention.
Yeah, women's bodies are political spaces.
One more question, and please also expand it with whatever is still on your mind, which should be voiced out, because I think it's also like so like reducing that, Cecilia, this person from vaginal yogurt, what we were saying before. I would like to tell us, because usually I ask this question at the beginning, like to the guest of Ferment Radio, like, so who you are. And I would like to finish with this, and let's stop to talk about this yogurt.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Cece. I am, as I said, I'm a psychiatrist. I'm completing my residency training now. I have a PhD in psychology. I do research in mental health. I'm particularly interested in how people develop depression and anxiety disorders. I do primarily brain imaging work, so far away from microbiology most of the time. And, you know, all of this really, I mean, it's so funny because this was really just something I did for fun, you know, for some kind of entertainment. It really does not relate a lot to the work that I do professionally. And it just goes to show people can be multifaceted.
So true, definitely.
Yeah. I think if there's one other thing we didn't talk about that I usually try to bring up is that we're still not, I don't think anyone's really sure if this is a safe thing to do in terms of making yogurt from, I mean, really from any body culture, fermentation from, I know there's other people who've done things like make beer from, you know, yeast, body yeast and those kinds of things. But when I did this project, I realized I had this yogurt, and I realized I wasn't really sure if it was safe to eat because we have bacteria in our vaginas that can be pathogenic and others that can be good. And it made yogurt that looked and smelled okay, which is usually how we judge a ferment, right? But you don't really know. And the way that we know fermentation is something that really, and you've covered this so well in your podcast. It's an ancient knowledge. You know, it comes down, and we know that these ferments are safe because, you know, sometimes because the cultures we get are, you know, we use them directly, or because we know that these are the situations that create safe bacteria and safe ferments. But, you know, I'm sure vaginal yogurt, I bet it may have been a source for ferments in the distant past, and we don't know. But we just like the idea of a new type of fermentation is something that is completely unknown. It's so divorced from the way that we understand fermentation, right? So I would say, you know, my professional advice is not that I'm giving advice technically, but I wouldn't necessarily do this or eat this because we don't really know if it's safe. And different people's biomes are going to be very different. So there's something interesting there, I think, in the idea that you can make your own ferment that'll be specific to you, that'll be different from anybody else's. And some people's may be safe and some people's won't. But the idea of something that you can, of producing a ferment that's not one that's been done for thousands of years and known and understood and known to be safe, it really makes you think about what role fermentation has in our society in general and how we relate to it. It's always an old practice. It's never something new.
Thank you for bringing this up. I think that it's super important topic, and I think I kind of omitted to talk about it or ask you about it because for me, this whole notion of like a bad bacteria basically is also very questionable in a way that basically, especially when we do wild fermentation, that we wait for something to, you know, contaminate the food, it's the same dangerous to my understanding because you never know what will come from the air. And I think that
that's true.
This idea that we trust more the labels of food, for example, we buy, the expiration date on there, than our own senses, like, okay, it smells good, like I'm salivating when I see this. I think those are usually, I want to believe that we still have some fragments of some like an instinct that we kind of can recognize what is eatable. And of course, like it's not about like turning into vaginal yogurt diet, but I personally, and that was my subjective kind of, silencing of this topic. I think this whole thread, and which was so actually overexposed in this media coverages, is like it. I disagree with this, and my bad that I silenced something I disagree with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm kind of agnostic. I ate it and I was okay. I didn't give it to anybody else. It makes sense to me that flora that's growing in me would probably be safe to consume. But I think I'm sort of at the end of my knowledge there about what makes a ferment safe to eat or not. And I've certainly worked with patients who had terrible infections from bacteria that are normal flora. Exactly what makes those, turns that from a healthy balance to an infection is a process that I don't really understand either. So, and it may have nothing to do with the bacteria itself. It may have other things to do with the immune system and the environment. And so I don't know. I think it's an interesting question. I don't know the answer. I don't know what makes the ferment safe. You're right. We do wild fermentation. I've done wild fermentation, and I don't know how to know if it's safe or not, except from using my senses the way that you said. It's an interesting thing to think about, and certainly the way in medical science we try to control things as much as we can, and we're uncomfortable as physicians. We're uncomfortable with that lack of knowledge.
Thank you so much for this. This was amazing to hear all those details, and I'm also thinking, I hope I didn't kind of drag you to talk about the things which are like really far past and probably super like I don't know, not connected to anything what you do right now. But I think it's very interesting to hear you like also looking back at it with the perspective.
In the world we live in, doing something out of the sheer fun beyond productivity or profit is mostly misunderstood and oftentimes condemned. Just like Cecile said, if she had built a robot out of the cutlery, nothing would have happened. But since she happened to use her own vagina for a project, all hell broke loose. Making yogurt out of her vaginal secretions brought a series of personal problems she would have never expected. But the fact it also brought forth political, economic, and social issues reveals how distant we are from our own bodies. It raised so many different questions, among them what is actually a good ferment? Is it so that our dependence on capitalism is such that we trust a company label more than our own doings? How far can we go with wild fermentation? Thank you, Cecil, for sharing this story with us. Stay tuned and keep fermenting. If you would like to know more about the show, listen to this episode again, or find previous episodes, please go to fermentradio.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. I'm always looking forward to hearing from you at hello@fermentradio.com. Ferment Radio is produced by Super Eclectic and supported by Arts Promotion Center Finland.